Welcome to War Room Pandemic. We're live from Capitol Hill in the nation's capital. It is Friday, the 6th of March, the year of our Lord 2020. We're on episode 34 and are deep into our second month of covering the pandemic that came out of central China, of Hubei province in Wuhan, and has had now a global impact both on healthcare and the global economy. Joined today by Jason Miller has decided to hold over from War Room 2020, and Jack Maxey, who runs our the engine room of the War Room, the website. Hashtag War Room Pandemic. Want everybody to join the show, episode 34. And the John Fredericks Radio Network, the Salem Broadcasting Radio Network, America's Voice.news, the streaming platform of the Trump Revolution, both here in the United States and worldwide. And, of course, FM 99.1 and FM 103.9. in Chicago and the greater Chicago suburbs. This virus is a demon, and we cannot allow this demon to hide. That is President Xi, and they went through historic efforts to stop the demon, and we don't know how it materialized, where it came from. That's all going to be worked out over the days, weeks, months ahead. But we do know that Xi and the totalitarian dictatorship that is the Chinese Communist Party went to Herculean efforts unheard of, unseen in mankind's history, to stop this, to stop the spread of this virus. 1/10 of humanity at one point in time was under lockdown or quarantine in China. President Trump, nothing is inevitable. That's his quote, and the subtext is all we have to fear is fear itself. But you have to get ahead of the facts. Steve Cortez, one of my partners and a guy that I think is one of the smartest financial guys around, on Stuart Varney on CNBC just moments ago. I guess Fox Business. Stuart Varney's on Fox Business now. Moments ago said, echoing Jason Miller, said President Trump is now a wartime president. And this is not a war against a foreign army. This is a war against a virus. And that war is twofold. One is protecting not just the American people, but the people of the world, because the United States will end up being the indispensable nation in this conflict. But also this contagion that's spreading now throughout the world, not just the shutdown of basketball tournaments, not the shutdown of restaurants or bars and people not going on airplanes and conventions and hotels, all that, the perturbations that happen when something like this goes global. But more importantly, this deep systematic issue we have with globalization, that everything is rail-headed in China, including our drugs, generic drugs, all the APIs, the building blocks of vitamin C, of penicillin, we can't make our mask, all this, which the Trump task force is now working on day in and day out. You know, if you listen to the show, you're going to be months ahead of where the news is going to be. We started this. We knew it was going to be a world historical event. Okay, this is not to panic people. This is not to get people upset. It's to just let people know this is the information. This is happening. There's something going on in China that is unprecedented in world history. And you may not have an interest in this virus, but this virus has an interest in you, both your personal health and your personal economic well-being in your family. Jack Maxey and Jason Miller. And one of the reasons I wanted Jason to stand over, Jack, we're going to turn to you in a moment and go through the punch list of how this thing's expanding worldwide. Jason, the President of the United States, what are we doing today? Vice President Trump head of the task force, went to Seattle yesterday. I thought Governor Inslee, they had a very good on. I thought the optics was good, what we're all pulling together. We can't make this a partisan issue. That has to be pulled together. The president had a busy schedule today, supposed to go to Tennessee to see this horrific results of this tornado, the storms, but was scheduled to go to CDC. What is the state of play as we speak?
So state of play at the moment, President is not going to CDC today. He's trying to get that rescheduled for as soon as possible. I think he needs to do it as soon as possible.
You think he needs to do it this afternoon?
I think absolutely, yeah.
Why are we not going to see? Fauci comes on today, and look, you're the messaging expert from the 2016 campaign. I know a lot of people, you're highly regarded throughout the White House and others. Dr. Fauci's a good man, and he's a knowledgeable man. But Dr. Fauci has a tendency to say one thing one day and another thing another, give another implication. You know, he was on the Katz-Matidi show the weekend we started this show, and we're coming out saying, hey, this thing is big in China. You got to deal with it. And he's sitting there going, oh, it's the common cold. Nothing's going to happen, right? So he's been wrong on many of these things. On the Today Show, I don't know if we still have that clip that if you can play. I know we had it from 2020, but for our pandemic audience, he's on the Today Show today. And I think it's a little bit of loose messaging. And by the way, if you can't get to it, it's fine. You can summarize it. But it's a little bit of loose messaging. The CDC, did have an issue. The CDC did have an issue with these with the testing kits, and it was from, whether it's finger pointing to Obama or not, there was this concept that things had to go back to Atlanta, had to be done there, couldn't be at the regional field offices. We've gotten updates from people that have been in the field that's been changed so we can get more expedited. We didn't hit the million target that Vice President Trump said, I think, last week, which is also on messaging. You must hear under-promise and over-perform. You can't over-promise and then under-perform. Number one, the American people are looking for that type of guidance. Number two, that's how it gets politicized, because that's how all of a sudden people start harping, well, Penn said this, Penn said that. Let's go to the Today Show today with Dr. Fauci.
President Trump said, quote, it's all going to work out, as we just heard in Tom Costello's piece. Do you agree with that assessment? And is the administration showing enough urgency here, Dr. Fauci?
Well, certainly the administration is showing urgency here. I mean, the task force meets every single day. We have conference calls, multiple ones every single day. This is 24/7 for us, so it isn't as if this is taken lightly. This is a serious issue. Again, it sometimes gets confusing for the American public because the overall risk in the country of getting infected is low. But as we've seen in Seattle, they now have community cases, and that's something that is a bit concerning, and that's the reason why they began the social distancing in Seattle in the state of Washington. So it's something you take very seriously.
Okay, I want to go to this because we've had Hatfield. Hatfield is 3 seconds to midnight. Dr. Hatfield is now, beavering away, helping people do reports, all this kind of stuff, going to the show as often as possible. He's obviously in high demand, and we're telling him, hey, go work and do what you got to do to help get this better. We've talked about social distancing. The only two solutions to this, a vaccine, and let's be brutally frank, the vaccine, they still don't have a vaccine for SARS. They really don't have a vaccine for HIV, for AIDS. They've got a combination of drugs, but I think 39 million people have died from that. SARS, 17 years into it, still does not have a vaccine.
No.
Right? And so I'm not saying a vaccine is not there. We got the best biotech in the world. We got some amazing people out there. It could happen, but it's probably a year plus away.
And an important thing to remember, and it goes back to a lot of the propaganda at the start of this epidemic, then they call it COVID-19, then they call it the coronavirus. The official name, outside of the World Health Organization, but the official name is SARS novel coronavirus-2.
Yes.
The one in 2003 was -1.
-1. This is a SARS type virus. My point about him saying this today is that you have a probability of getting it, right? You then have doctors, Gabriel Leung and others are saying, hey, 60 or 70% of the world's population get it. I think the issue is for the vast majority of people, it's a cold or it's a flu or it's something like that in very mild symptoms. Sometimes you're asymptomatic. For some people, some certain subset, and we're trying to work through the numbers. So I think President Trump rightly says it's probably not 3.4%. As we get more people tested, as the denominator grows, that will clearly come down. But I don't think you can have a situation, and this is one of the things I think people have to focus on, and we're trying to get people to focus on. This thing clusters. It clustered in central China. Now, it's spread throughout all of China, and they did Herculean efforts to shut things down, but they had a massive cluster in an area the size of France in Hubei province, right? And by the way, the numbers there are much bigger than they let out. You saw yesterday we put up, I think, the officials are going through the housing complexes there, the apartment complex, and they're being heckled. They're being heckled by the Chinese citizens. If you heckle a CCP official, you end up in a hole somewhere, okay? If you're heckling, that means the whole neighborhood was heckling these guys. Fake news, you're phony, you're fake. I mean, it was full on like getting the Bronx cheer. That you see this clustered in Iran, and we're going to get to going around the world in a second. Iran, a massive problem there at the elite level. You see in Italy, in northern Italy, a cluster. You see in Korea, a cluster. You see in the Pacific Northwest, right? Something came back from either the Diamond Princess or it got back somehow. It's in there. And here's the thing. Jason, you're from Seattle. Probably the only conservative I know from Seattle. You're from Seattle. How big a deal is it in your hometown? As chilled as the people are in Seattle, right? The second most important tech center we have in the United States, and I would argue in the world, is Seattle, the greater Seattle area. You've basically shut down the city.
It's basically shut down. And to put it in perspective, look, as I talked to my dad and talked to my mom, you go to any grocery store and they're basically wiped out. I mean, it's not at a full-on panic, but you go and they're just, you might hear, say you go to a Target and you'll see like the hand sanitizers are wiped out, in other parts of the country. There, everything's wiped out. Anything that's a staple is wiped out.
And Seattle folks are not, I mean, it's one of the most well-educated parts of the country. It's got amazing universities. You got University of Washington. It's got the tech center. It's Microsoft's headquarters. You got so many companies headquartered up there. These are not people that panic easily, correct?
No, and even to the point then, okay, well, normally if you're grocery stores, well, we'll just go to Amazon. We'll do that. Well, guess what? Amazon on the West Coast is wiped out for all of these things. And so for a lot of the, whether it be the hand sanitizers, but even going into a lot of the food goods, those types of items are wiped out.
Your dad's a welder, right?
Correct.
So
Retired.
it's retired. So he's kind of he's one of our deplorables, right? How does he view, from the perspective of a guy who's not some millennial riding his bike to Microsoft's headquarters every day, right? How does working class people, a little older, that have been through some things, right? Seen World War II, seen Vietnam, had some economic up and downs. How does he view this?
I mean, he's definitely he's right in that age range where it's problematic. He's had like a lot of folks in the country. I mean, he is in that targeted demographic, and so we had a talk, and I just told him that hey, like stay away from crowds. Go to the grocery stores.
Do you believe this is coming evident now to older people that this thing's it's serious for the younger folks, but it's deadly serious for me. I got to be on super watch.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, the federal is telling folks don't go and visit people at nursing homes. I mean, that's where it is so clearly hitting older folks in this country. I mean, I think people get it. I think it's safe. But look, I mean, in Seattle, they're telling everyone don't go to work, telecommute. But here's the issue, as you guys have brilliantly discussed on the show. That doesn't work for everyone. If you're a food service employee, if you work at a hotel, if you work in any aspect of public safety, you can't. If you're a police officer, you don't get to telecommute.
Well, the vibrant nature of Seattle is driven by the great tech companies they have, and then you have the great clubs, you have the great restaurants, you have all the social life, you have the hotels. It's a vibrant, robust city.
But let's remember what really drives Seattle, okay? Boeing aircraft.
Oh, yeah, it's okay.
The Facebook guys and the Google guys. And
the 10 employees they have
in the gig economy, they can work from home, but you can't put in a rivet. You can't.
But you don't need to put in a rivet when you're going to have 50% of the planes canceled.
True enough. But I mean, this will eventually.
No. I'm saying the impact on Boeing is going to be massive because you've got Cathay Pacific. You have these airlines now that are just parking them, right? When you're parking, what Lufthansa just announced, 50% of their flights are being cut?
Yes. And what's ironic about that, if we always go back to this wonderful Hopkins war game study of how to respond to a coronavirus, and in that, we said this before, the Lufthansa representative, they have groups of guys from all over the world representing industry, and they say, hey, it could be cut 50% for a couple of months. The guy says, what? If that happens, we've got to lay this out because we're out of business. And so we're looking at this, I think, on a global nature, particularly with these nationalized airlines that already operate really in the red.
We're really proud of the fact that we got up, I think on the first show, this Hopkins study, the Gates study. We're going to have more of these. Every time you need to see a new piece of information, we see anything, we put it up on the site so you can get your arms around weeks ahead of where anybody else is.
Steve, I have a breaking, and thanks Greg in the War Room for being on top of this. Breaking: University of Washington classes will be held remotely for the remainder of the quarter. The school says services like hospitals, residence halls, dining, recreation, athletics facilities will continue to operate.
In Washington, they're starting to take on Hubei province type things. I mean, they're getting ahead of this. Starting in Hubei.
Let's be real. I wonder if this is the professors driving that, right? Because they're not limiting the exposure to the guys working at the gym. Because we've seen this in other industries, right? United Airlines canceled their flights to Milan earlier than expected because the flight crews did not want to fly.
I just want to get clear, Jason, if you can check down, I think the White House, is the point they're making by CDC, they didn't want to be a distraction down there today? Is that I think we're getting some messaging out or some back channel that people are saying, hey, the president, the Secret Service, all the kind of lockdown you have to do, as you take a presidential trip somewhere, and they want people there working, they want people on top of things. I think that's one of the things that's obviously very important for the president ultimately to get there. Okay, Jack, let's go around the world and get people up to date on episode 34 of did I say 23 at the start? I think it's episode 34. It's episode 34 of War Room Pandemic on Friday, 6 March 2020. Hold, Jason, you got something for me?
Yes. So this is breaking, literally just posted 2 minutes ago on USA Today from the great David Jackson. Headline: Trump CDC visit in Atlanta is back on after coronavirus case turned up negative. The lead graph: President Trump is again set to tour the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta on Friday after the planned trip was briefly canceled due to a suspected case of coronavirus that turned out to be negative, according to Stephanie Grisham.
Yeah, this is very powerful. So the president's going to go to, I think he's going to go to Tennessee first and then go to Atlanta, it looks like. But this is very powerful. The president of the United States now confirmed going to CDC and taking, I think, more and more charge every day of this situation. The vice president heads the task force. So the chairman of the task force reports to him. It looks like the task force is adding economic people. We've advocated, just for simplicity, there ought to be an economic task force because you got two things happening simultaneously. You have a pandemic related to a coronavirus, or type of SARS virus, has now gone global, right, and having a huge impact on economies we're going to talk about here in a second. And you have an economic contagion. The railhead of that is China. And part of that's the perturbations of things like, restaurants and nightclubs and hotels, air travel, everything associated with social distancing, if you get into social distancing. But more fundamentally, it is about the supply chain. It's about China. This whole concept over the last 20, 30 years of making China the central part of the world's manufacturing base and everything else shipped out there in just-in-time inventory. That all has to be worked through. We know the guys at the White House and throughout the government. This is a whole of government approach. So, Jack, let's start with France and Italy. Let's start with Europe because Macron, who was a little slow to this, Trump, and for all the criticisms he's getting, he was the first one to really lock down, hey, stop travel with Chinese nationals into the country, which Biden, first off, has got to be held accountable, said it was xenophobic, racist, and nativist, all wrong. And also President Trump quarantined people. No president had done that in 50 years, and he took a lot of blowback. Macron was slow to this until he went to that hospital. And let's talk about what's going on in France.
Well, all across Europe, and I think this is something that we need to look at for ourselves. Remember, Italy 2 weeks ago had one case. 3,858 today, 577 in Germany, 423 in France. Today, we are at 230. At the Élysée Palace on last night, the French President Emmanuel Macron said that the slide towards an epidemic.
He addressed the nation last night, right?
It's inexorable. It's something that they have to prepare for. And so I give him credit. I give him props. This is what leadership requires in this sort of thing. You have to.
What he says inexorable. They're going to a pandemic there, but what actions did he specifically? Because they didn't shut down the border. They have not closed the borders, right? Number one,
they have not closed the borders yet, but they have.
Because that's the beating heart of the EU globalization project. He ain't serious until he closes the borders.
Well over 100 schools. And, each country's taking this a little bit differently. The Netherlands, for example, are starting to feel real pressure even within their hospitals, and yet the deaths are still low. One thing that is very positive that came out after Tedros gave his speech yesterday that we need to pull out all the stops. We're calling on every country to act with speed, scale, and clear-minded determination. But it's still not a global pandemic. I guess those checks are still coming in from Beijing. But one thing that was very positive, and we've been following these guys from the start, they've been really good. Hong Kong University released some research looking at the fatality risk.
Okay. Dr. Gabriel Lung in the crowd over there.
And they
the pros from Dover.
They looked at a huge number of patients, and they think it's really much closer to 1.5%.
Big news.
1.4%, which is very, very positive. This still means that the elderly are going to be most at risk, and perhaps like regular.
Well, at 1.4%, 1.4% means it's 14 or 15 times deadlier than the flu.
Yes.
Okay, that's still a high number, but it's not the 3.4, the 4.9%, which are that is.
But 1.4 to 50% infection rate for America. That's 165.
Talk about Italy. People. How many dead in Italy right now? I know the economy right there. Italy's on the tip. I think they were in a recession, starting a recession when this started. I think Italy is going to be in a free fall here very shortly.
I think one of the things that we all have to understand is this show can no longer be about a new person in North Carolina, a new person here, a new person there, because we just have to prepare ourselves that this is a global pandemic. It's going to sweep. Look at Seattle. I mean, it's very similar to what we saw in Italy. A week ago, we had one case. Now there are over 50 cases in Seattle, and 11 have died. So most of the people who have fallen ill and died are the elderly with real problems. Hopefully, at the beginning of next week, we're going to get.
Have we sorted out and Jason, jump in here. The vice president, not guaranteed, but said we'd be at 1 million, be able to basically test 1 million people, I think, by the end of this week. That's not going to happen. We got a minute. I want to jump to, let's do the messaging first, Jason. Is that the right messaging to put out where you overpromise and underperform?
Yeah, absolutely. Because look, what people need to know is that they're getting the right and accurate information from the vice president and from the whole of government. And
right, accurate information.
Correct. Yeah. And so, look, if we come up short on something, and to be clear, there will be other benchmarks that we don't hit, or there will be, speed bumps that we have along the way. As long as people know that they're getting the accurate information, they'll be forgiving on some of this.
Dr. Fauci, again, was on Today's Show talking about this thing. When we come back, we'll try to get Eric Prince here to talk about the global implications along with Jack. But, Jack, I want to address when we come back the situation with testing. What do we know? I'm sure President Trump is going to be the top of his list today in Atlanta with the CDC. Where do we stand with the testing? We're in pandemic. Episode 34. Jason, Jack, Steve will return in just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
Is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Episode 34. We're live from the nation's capital on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Salem Broadcast Radio Network, on americasvoice.news, the streaming platform of the Trump Revolution, FM 99.1 and FM 103.9 in Chicagoland. Jack Maxey with me. We're going to try to get Eric Prince in here for this part of the show. The virus is a demon, and we cannot allow this demon to hide, so says President Xi before he started the most dramatic quarantine effort in world history. The President of the United States says nothing is inevitable. It's human action, human agency that can stay and stop this and make it much less horrific than it could be. And that's the action of Donald Trump. The Vice President of the United States yesterday went out to Seattle, Washington, which is the epicenter right now of this virus in the United States, and also the epicenter of one of the economic contagions as Boeing and our tech companies are going to be affected. All the tech companies are working at home, and as Jack Maxey brings up, very tough to rivet an engine onto Boeing. We're going to have to, Boeing's got so many high value-added jobs and been such a winner under the Trump economic program of building, so many planes for the air fleets around the world. We're going to have to check into all that. But the President of the United States, a decision has been made, and he will be at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, the headquarters of it, this afternoon for a full briefing of that. And I think, Jack, one of the things is that I guess there was some confusion whether there was somebody that had the virus at CDC or not, but it looks like that's been cleared up. The Secret Service has approved it. The President of the United States will be there.
But in some other areas, we see that there maybe a staffer in the Congress who has tested positive.
Somebody might have gone to APEC last week.
We'll see how they react.
Yep.
And they're talking about several other staffers who went to APEC. As we know, some members of the family that are all ill up in Westchester, New York, went to APEC. They haven't given us definitive numbers. But there was also a case of a tourist who landed in Bhutan and then went into India and tested positive, and that tourist came from Washington, D.C. So the virus is amongst us, and I think that we have to realize that, and we've been saying that all along. As these tests come forward, we're going to have more and more numbers.
But let's talk about the testing now. The Vice President said last week we're going to be able to deploy 1 million. It's quite one thing is quite obvious is that of all the industrial democracies, right, the United States is somehow way behind on testing.
Yes.
We just haven't deployed, and people I don't think are confused now. In South Korea, you're pulling up to a drive-in, they're putting a thing in your ear, bang, you hit you. Then you get if you got something high, they pull you off to the side, they do a swab, and they can tell right there. They're testing thousands, if not tens of thousands a day. The same in Italy, supposedly testing thousands. In Japan, they're testing thousands. Why? And Fauci gets on the Today Show today, which is, remember, I'm not saying that Today Show is low information voters, but they're not the people that are listening to War Room 2020. They're not the people that are on Fox News or on MSNBC looking at Morning Joe. This is more of the general audience. Today they have Fauci on, and he talks about these mistakes were made, but still doesn't give a clear indication of where we are right now.
Absolutely. And last night, the vice president said that anybody who wants a test will be able to get one. And then they sort of had to backtrack because the tests really haven't arrived at the hospitals. As we saw yesterday with Dr. Winters from Los Angeles, his hospital had no tests. Last night, de Blasio said,
Dr. Winters was St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, which is one of the finest hospitals in the country, but certainly an institutional landmark in Southern California.
And so what they've done in certain places, like in Washington State, you remember that teenager that they found ill just a few days ago, which was a big wake-up because he had no connection to any of the other victims as well. That test was done by the University of Washington healthcare system with the permission of the FDA, and we're starting to see those kinds of tests take the fore because the CDC has not been able to get their act together. It's unclear exactly
People should know
what
that
the problem is.
Well, these tests are as much art as they are science.
Yes.
This had a two-part test, a reagent. There were some aspects about the reagent. They wanted everything to come back to Atlanta. There was some confusion about deploying this. Cuomo stepped up. They want, they want hospitals and local hospitals to be able to give this, et cetera. So they're trying to work all this out. I think and I believe that one of the reasons that the president's not just changing his schedule, but wants to go and will go to CDC today, is actually hear it from people there. Where do we stand? What's the story in this thing? How are we going to get it deployed? Because I want everybody tested. Remember, the president's saying something very powerful. If you about keep calm and carry on. One of the things he's saying is that, hey, the 3.4% mortality rate here, which would obviously be something that would be unprecedented given how infectious this is, that he believes it's at 1% or lower. The way you do that is you test more people and you bring the denominator down, because I think his point's very well taken. For the vast, vast majority of people, it will be some form of a cold or something that's quite manageable, right? But you've got to do the testing. That's where President Trump, I think, has to force us today, the CDC, to say, hey, look, brief me, make sure I understand it. Then he can get a message out there that's the right message.
And Dr. Phillips, the chief hospital epidemiologist at the NYU Langone Health System, had a great way to sort of describe what we're looking at. He said it's hard to conclude.
I eat the mic, and you back away from the mic. So I tell you what, I'll stay right here, and you stay right there, and we'll have a nice balance.
It's radio, Maxie, He said it's hard to conclude how long it's been circulating in our environment. He's talking about New York here. He said there's no doubt that the ability to test readily may rapidly change our appreciation for the extent of the disease in a place like New York. But effectively, we don't know. That's the problem. 3 weeks ago, we were going to set up in 5 different cities the ability to randomly test influenza victims so that we could have an idea of potential community spread. Well, now we know that there is community spread, and there's even a guy in North Carolina who just an hour or two ago they announced.
Explain for the audience what community spread is. I want to make sure
community spread means that it is circulating inside the community, and with case tracking, we can't define where you caught it from, right?
But it looks like when they say community spread, it's kind of an alarm that, hey, this may not come from somebody who was in China or somebody had contact with China. We don't know right now, but it's spreading in the community.
Right, and this was the big concern with the first cases in the Pacific Northwest. There were no obvious vectors for their exposure, and this was a little bit of the slowness in testing. The first woman who got very ill in Seattle because she did not meet any of the criteria for the CDC testing. Now, accordingly, the new criteria as of last night, and hopefully with tests, this will mean that as many people who want to get tested as possible will get tested, because there's a little bit of a panic. Let's face it. You find out a guy at Microsoft had it, or no one at Microsoft had it. You find out a guy at someone, XYZ Corporation, had this disease. You've been told to stay home. Well, it's clear that you would want to be tested so that you could know if you had the disease.
Remember, President Trump, nothing is inevitable. Keep calm and carry on. We got to get ahead of this. I do think, I want to go to Secretary of State Pompeo was on Squawk Box this morning. What he said about China was that, hey, and I think he was very polite and diplomatic about this, but he said, we did not get the information sharing that you normally get in these type of situations between medical officials, accurate information for a period of time. That is basically in the November and December and maybe even to the mid-January timeframe. So that's 90 days, which then they had to come and do these draconian actions of this full quarantine. It seems to me, and particularly when it comes in clusters, it seems to me, and this is, I think people have to focus on, we try to be ahead of the curve here on the show, is that in Seattle, in this cluster, They're looking at what they're doing in Lombardy. They're looking at what they did in Wuhan, and you're seeing the beginning of some sort of formal social separation, right? Where you basically, we just heard the University of Washington's canceled classes, at least on campus. You're going to do it either through some sort of distance learning. But University of Washington, you've got Microsoft, you got the big companies. All of Seattle, I think today is in basic, work from home day. You're starting to see, if you look at the trend, and over the weekend and on Monday, we'll get on top of this about, does this go next to more of a Wuhan type situation?
Well, obviously things like that could happen, but I don't think that we would ever have the draconian measures that they had in Wuhan. And there's actually some questions as to whether, because of the communicability of this, did they make it worse in some respects by locking people into these fever centers? Also,
I mean, the quarantine centers. When they went to your house,
yeah.
Remember, in Wuhan, what they eventually did, and quite frankly, it's still in a very rough stage in China. Don't believe all the Chinese propaganda that's come out. It's still in a very rough situation there. But when they went door to door, remember that Wuhan is 40% bigger in population than New York City. They went door to door, knocking on your door. They gave you the test they thought worked. Hey, if you tested positive, you went to a quarantine center, not to a hospital,
yes.
Right? And that's the question: is did it spread more? Because a quarantine center, they really weren't there to make you. If you got better, fine. But if you didn't get better, and they had an ambulance to take you to go be burned, to go cremated, that was fine too.
You are properly calling them quarantine centers, but euphemistically, the CCP called them fever centers. Where just ill people go to recover.
Yeah. But poor Raheem would be there. If you have any fever at all, you're going, right? They don't want to hear the talk about I got corona or I don't have corona.
We have a new aphorism for acronym for CCP. It's the commie corona pandemic that swept the world. And frankly, we would have been more ahead of this. Think if we were 3 weeks ahead of this.
Oh, no. This is look, in hindsight,
changer.
When this is all going to be looked through, and it's all going to be number one, and Tom Cotton is right. It's incumbent upon the Chinese Communist Party to fully open up every book, record, etc. of the P4 lab in Wuhan so that the world can understand that. And people say, oh, he's a conspiracy theory wingnut. Bill Gertz is a conspiracy theory wingnut. Maria Bartiromo, Steve Bannon. Hey, all we're saying is that, show us all the information. And we also have to know how long they suppress this before it got loose. This is what's allowed it to spread throughout the world. Right. That's why President Trump's bold action at the beginning of this to limit travel, and people are saying now, should you limit travel, not just from China and Iran, but should you limit it from other parts of the world? Let's go to Iran for a second, because I think this is, and look, I've said for many years that Iran and China are business partners. Iran is the anchor in Southwest Asia for the hegemonic move of the Chinese Communist Party, and just saying. Here you've got senior levels of the government. 8 to 10% of their parliament is tested positive for corona.
Yes.
You've seen, senior members of their government. MSNBC last night had a great thing going around where they had the mullahs meeting, and they had they circled the people that had coronavirus from the highest level of the council.
And there are social habits in that part of the world that make this very difficult, and sometimes long-term social habits are hard to break. Very often, men greeting each other, and that's I will kiss each other 4 times, twice on each cheek. This is like welcome to Wuhan, and they have.
But that's why the Saudis have limited now Hajj. They've limited the pilgrimages there to
They have
Mecca,
closed
Medina.
the holy sites.
Closed the holy sites. You've seen the Vatican has shut stuff down today. Let's talk about the Vatican. And I want to go to the Wall Street Journal article because. You're getting a little misinformation out of the Vatican. The Wall Street Journal says, hey, they really haven't and said he's been tested and passed. This is Pope Francis.
According to the Wall Street Journal, essentially the Vatican has said Francis is suffering from seasonal flu, and he's recovering nicely. He doesn't have any symptoms that would imply anything else. But they have not come out and declared that he actually took a coronavirus test and passed it. Now, they did come out today and say there is one employee who they will not identify inside the Vatican City who has tested positive for the coronavirus. And there are 42 infections in the greater Rome area. I think that one thing that we all have to understand is that this is just going to the numbers are going to get bigger and bigger every day. And we don't want to freak anybody out, but this is just the case. If we look at America and we look at our first-tier allies like Japan and Italy and France, Steve and I have talked about this many times, how can we be that different than they are? Japan has a fantastic public health system. So does South Korea. So does Italy. So does the Netherlands, where we're getting reports that some of their ICUs are being overwhelmed because they actually took a very conservative approach, which was dictated by their own CDC and what we knew at the time. So they got a little bit behind the curve, too. And that's what we really want to make sure that does not happen here.
I think this is one of the reasons that President Trump is going to the CDC today. Remember, we've got I think, much more than the World Health Organization. We've got literally the most important, and they've got great operations in France. They have in the United Kingdom. You've got in Hong Kong. You have these great universities. Michael Bloomberg put $300 million, I think, into the Michael Bloomberg Center for Global Health at Johns Hopkins University. Another spectacular. But the pros from Dover in this regard are at CDC and at the Army's research lab up at Fort Detrick.
Absolutely. And what we'll do with that Johns Hopkins, we posted it several times. We'll post it for you again because it's worth watching, because it gives you an idea of what to expect, not just on the social scale, the disease scale, but also on a broad economic scale, because I think they really have called so much of this correctly from their
Johns
study
Hopkins
group.
study by Dr. Tenor, correct? Toner, by Dr. Toner. By Dr. Toner is, and we talked about this on the first show. Now, the New York Magazine, CNN, Axios put it up yesterday. Just saying, guys. A couple of months late, but okay. But Dr. Toner's study that was done in October, coming off of this horrific swine flu that China had that killed half of their hog population, his studies back up, took coronavirus, put it in Brazil. He said he didn't want to cheat by putting it in China because it was spread too quickly. It killed eventually 65 million people throughout the world. But more importantly, as he says, it basically had an implosion of the world's economy. That was the big thing, was the kind of the anarchy that came from the world's economy slowing down. That's why this thing's got to be studied. Not saying this is going to happen. Remember,
Absolutely.
President Trump says nothing is inevitable. If you get ahead of this, you get on top of it. There's nothing. We should keep calm and carry on. But it's about human action. It's going to be human action, human agency that limits the effect here.
I read something last night that I'm going to tell you about anecdotally about keep calm and carry on. I'm constantly chasing every rabbit down a hole in this subject. And apparently,
Jack will chase a rabbit every now and then.
Keep calm and carry on was thought to would be offensive to the British people. It was never used during the Second World War because they thought, hey, keep calm while your house is blowing up and carry on. It was
that's a meme that it wasn't.
Most of them were destroyed, and a stack of them were found in a store about 10 years ago, and then took off in the internet world.
Two things you ought to read. Dr. John Barry's The Great Influenza about the pandemic of 1918, what's called the Spanish flu, but we now know started, according to Dr. Hatfield, in Haskell, Kansas. You can go to Amazon and get it. It's a fantastic read. And one of the powers of this read, it talks about the second wave.
Yes.
That's also the important thing when you read the study of Dr. Toner. It's the second wave. That's why we're tracking China so closely. It's China, to keep their economy and to keep the regime in power, they're now forcing people back to work, particularly in the massive factories down south, the tech factories, to start it. People are saying in China, hey, has this thing been fully, have we got this fully under control? Because it's always the second wave that gets you. In 3 seconds until midnight, which is Stephen Hatfield, and he's one of our co-hosts on the show, although he's been deployed to work on various activities around town to give his brilliance. 3 seconds until midnight, he does all the major pandemics.
And Stephen said just 2 days ago, he said one of his concerns, as somebody who has studied how these viruses work, he thinks that China might be making a grave error in forcing people back to work because you could get a second round of this thing. And it's very dangerous to have a second round while you still have people suffering from the first round because it tends to overwhelm the system. John Barry, I'm going to say this. I said it last week when someone asked me, what's my advice to the president? John Barry's conclusion from this: officials need to tell the truth, even if it's truth people don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Because populations can handle the truth. What they cannot handle is thinking they've been bamboozled. And you can look at this historically through epidemics. Whole empires collapse because of lack of information and things like this. So,
well, this was, remember, and my dad is 98, but he still remembers, and he talks about as a child, it wasn't just World War I, it was this kind of psychological scar of the Spanish flu had really eviscerated, and many, in that case, many young people died. The Spanish flu was kind of the reverse of the coronavirus. The coronavirus seems to be weighted towards the elderly or people that potentially, maybe heavy smokers, have emphysema, or already have certain lung diseases. Here, the Spanish flu was weighted towards, it kind of came out of Haskell, Kansas, to the young men who were then volunteered or drafted to go into the Army in World War I, in our early lead up to these, had never lived in these concentrated areas. One thing you do understand is that the way this is communicated is in dense urban areas. That's why there's been so many pandemics that have started since the 1990s, because you've had this globalization project, and it's kind of these third world nations have all now have dense, like city like Wuhan, who nobody ever heard about, that didn't study China up until a month ago. Now people realize, hey, how did the city in central China get to be bigger than New York City?
Well, I think that one thing that we just have to be concerned about is we can't panic, right? There's nothing will ever be accomplished with panic. We have to practice social separation, and I want to beat into everybody's mind. Social separation is not to make sure you never get the virus. It is to make sure that a city of 1 million people gets the virus over a period of time, stretches out the period of time in which infections occur, so that the hospital, the complex systems of that city do not fall apart, and we can manage it. So you'd rather have people get sick over a 3-month period than over a 2-week period.
Okay, I want to get a bunch of administrative stuff done because we've got such a packed show for the coming week. Number one, hashtag War Room Pandemic is the way you participate in the show. We want to do this all on community. We've got great input from our followers, our community, our viewers, our listeners on this. Even if you listen on the podcast, just put something up. We also, remember, we're on podcasts on every platform, besides being on live streaming on radio throughout the country, in certain FM stations. We have a website, War Room Pandemic. You can go there on the podcast. Give us a review. Tell us what you really think. We're trying to make the show better every day, to have experts on, better experts.
Also, I'd like to make an announcement. Kyle Obear, who's sort of our magic man on the internet stuff in the background, we've reorganized the webpage, and we're about to launch a email-driven newsletter every day with top-line stories and with the podcast, so you'll get it right in your email box. That's going out to hopefully a couple 100,000 later on today. And we want you to sign up. If somebody forwards it to you, sign up, and we'll get it right into your box. This is very important. We want as many people to understand what is going on. And as you've seen, we only concentrate on the facts here. We're not going to speculate on anything.
And we try to put you ahead of the curve. The things people are going to be talking, you're going to see on CNN, MSNBC a week from now. We want to make sure you see and hear and talk about and think about. We'll send you, if you go to the site, we're going to hook up with every important document, every piece of information out there. We work with the G News guys, too, to get you all the stuff's happening in China nonstop. Remember, this is still China-centric. There's still something historic that's happening in China. It is both a major global health issue, but it's also an economic issue. That's why the capital markets, we're going to have more capital markets discussion next week, the American economy. President Trump today, the Trump economy came out with unbelievable job numbers, blew people away. And the subtext of those job numbers are huge, but kind of overwhelmed by the coronavirus. We got all-time lows in 10-year treasuries. We got the stock market and huge fluctuation.
Quickly, Steve, a yes or no question from one of our viewers.
Yep.
Steve Bannon, do you think the markets really grasp the full implications of the coronavirus?
I do not think they get the full implication, particularly coming back from China. Now, part of that could be positive, but I think that's got to be messaged properly. I think one of the things the market's suffering from right now, not enough information. We'll be back on Monday.